but I didn't. I couldn't help it. It did me.
Victim.
And you can say, tisn't, like two children arguing, until you realize that the argument was stupid. Because you and it are one event. It isn't a question of it controlling you or you controlling it. It's all one event. As Teilhard de Chardin said, the whole universe is the only true atom, the only truly indivisible whole. So the human being, though, finds this difficult to understand because we're always telling each other, now you should be different.
You don't do that.
You ought to change. Don't be like that.
I've got a system.
Now listen, you're sick, and I got a system. See, I got a system. I've got a real school here, a thing that is very important, and you should come and study with that. It may not be mine, it may be some big sage or pundit that I know, and you should come around and study that. And I've thought about this for a long time, because I've heard every kind of opinion of all the sorts of things that I should do in order to get myself into shape.
This is good.
And I realized that if I followed this advice, I would spend my entire day doing exercises in preparation for life. I don't know when I'll ever get around to that. You know, I would have my half an hour's yoga practice, 1 hour of zazen, so much physical exercises, and so much memory practice, so much special diet preparation to be sure that I got proper food. And if I think this all through, I think, oh my God, it isn't worth it. Then another school of thought will say, no, that's the thing, you're getting confused. Just do one thing, see? But then I say, now how am I going to choose which one I'm going to do? Well, he says, obviously this one's the best. And before you know where you are, you're sewed up by some religious fanatic. Now, please, I don't want to do this to you. Please don't think that I have any such recipe that I'm going to give you anything to do for 5 minutes every morning. I just am not.
He's not going to do it.
I want to, my whole notion would be to set you all free so that you'd only have to attend one seminar, never have to come back.
Never. Learn it now, again, be the universe. He's not trying
That's
to
the idea,
pay
really.
a mortgage on a church.
Because I know that so far as my own livelihood is concerned, that there are always more people. And if, no, I don't collect the following and just send them all away. There are plenty more people to fill the vacuum. But this is the important, this is the whole idea that we're going to work on of a net. That you are like a dewdrop on a multidimensional spider's web early in the morning. And if you look at that thing carefully, you will see that in every dewdrop there are the reflections of all the other dewdrops. So the way that dewdrop looks goes with the way all the other ones look. See? A particular glimmer in it and so on. Its peculiar position, and everybody has to have a peculiar position in the cosmos. So you see, the reflections in every one of them are different according to the position they're in and the other dewdrops that they reflect at such and such angles. But nevertheless, the whole network, all the dewdrops, depend on each individual dewdrop. And each individual dewdrop mutually depends on all the others. And that's the sort of a scheme we're living in. And it a little bit affronts our logic at first, because we say, I can understand that I depend on this universe, because after all I need sunlight and air and water and the help of the society and all that kind of thing. I needed a father and mother. But looking at it from the other point of view, I find it very difficult to see how the whole thing depends on me. That's because we've been brought up with a put-down theory of the individual. No, children should be seen and not heard. You are the servant and subject of God, and don't you ask impertinent questions. Or another way of putting us down is to say, well, you're just a piece of a fluke in a mindless mechanism.
Shit.
We always managed not to find out that the relationship of the network is mutual. It runs both ways. That it depends on you just as much as you depend on it. Because you see, it's you.
Right. It's you.
With your ingenious brain that, for example, turns vibrations of air into sound. You turn whatever the sun is doing into light. You turn whatever the air is doing into a sky called blue. There is only blue for a brain. Just like if you hit a drum and it's got no skin, it won't make any noise. So it's the tight skin that evokes the noise out of a moving fist. No skin, no noise. So you, as the reflector, like the dewdrop reflects, you, as the so-called reflector of all that goes on, by the constitution of what kind of a reflector you are, you evoke what we call sun, moon, and stars, nebulae. Vast spaces. They're only vast in relation to you. They're not really vast.
In relation to you.
Only if you compare them with yourself, they're vast. They could be considered very tiny. Or equally, the space between two sides of a hair could be considered vast if you want to think about it that way. I mean, if you really want to go into a hair, there's an awful lot between one diameter of a hair, you know. And if you think about it a long time, you'll think it's what we call a vast subject. Study of hair. You know, from microscopy. It is a vast subject. Depends on the attitude, you see.
It's you.
But the basic principle, the thing I really want to try and get across, is this idea of going with the universe around you is your outside, just as much as the organs inside your skin are your inside.
Like that.
You go with it in the same way that the stalk goes with the root or with the flower. And as front goes with back, as north pole of magnet goes with south pole. This principle of relationship governs everything. I wouldn't say governs, I'm only using this wretched And it's important to realize, and let me repeat this, that the great universe does not control the small individual any more than the small individual actually controls the great universe. This is not a question of control. It is a question of more like dancing, of what happens, rather than what makes it happen. Things aren't made to happen. Only if you insist that a certain event is quite separate, then you can think of it being made to happen by the events that came before it. But if you realize they're all parts of one event, or different aspects, different phases of one event, then you see it happening and you don't see anything making it happen.
There's nothing making it happen.
Forcing. That whole idea of things being made to happen, in other words, goes back to the idea of a universe that is based on a monarchical image, where the boss says,
separate.
Damn it, you do that, and the thing can't help it, and so it's made to happen. But say in Chinese Taoist philosophy, the universe is just not seen in that way. It's not seen as, anything is not made to happen. It is what does happen. But it's all interrelated. And therefore there is a pattern to it. There is an order to it. The order of the net. Things and events are explained as being links in a causal chain. And so every particular happening that is identified as a thing or an event, which is, however, quite an arbitrary kind of selection, is explained by its past, by the chain of events which lead to it in a causal sequence. On the other hand, in thinking of the reticulate relationship, a thing is explained not simply by its relationship to past events, but by its context.
That's not cool.
That is to
Not
say,
okay
its
with destroying
relationship
fire
to
trucks.
present and future events as well as past, so that every event becomes something in a network. Now, you will very well understand that when you see the knots in a network,
That's one.
or better, the squares of the net, they're all held together by each other.
You need it.
Imagine the kind of network where instead of there being, something like knitting. In knitting, the stitches are all held together by each other. And if something breaks at one point, the thing starts raveling. So the reticulate view, or the net view of the universe, is one in which the Buddhists say everything mutually interpenetrates everything else. So, as I was trying to make the central point, the point of implication, the point of relativity, that things go together like two sticks standing on the ground in this way. See?
What?
They give each other mutual support.
Fire trucks, huh?
Or like the three
Really?
rings in the Ballantine beer trademark, or the Christian symbol of the Holy Trinity. Those rings interlock. But take one of them away, and the interlocking is broken down for all of them. So in the same way, the individual, although seeming to be something that rattles around in the universe, although a given planet or a given star seems to be something that is moving on its own, motion, the behavior of stars, is a situation that arises only because of the mutual interdependence of all stars. Because, to take a very simple illustration, if there is only one star in the whole universe, no motion can be ascribed to it. It can't even be said to be still. Nobody knows what it's doing because there's nothing for it to relate to. But take two stars, and they can get nearer to each other or further away from each other. But no one knows which is moving. Get three stars, and then you have, say, two close together, and one of them seems to go away. Now, who is moving away from who? Are the two stars saying, hey, we don't like you, we're going to get out of your way? Or are they saying to the other star, why don't you like us? Why do you keep going away? Well, who's right?
Or
Well, you can say on the principle
I'm
of
doing
democracy
it, I'm not
that the
doing it.
majority must be right.
it's happening to me.
Then they say, well, let's have an umpire, and we have a fourth star who can stand above us. You see, two stars can only move in a straight line with respect to each other. Three stars can move in a plane with respect to each other. But a fourth star can establish a third dimension, where we can say, I can look down on you and take an objective standpoint. But then the argument is which one of them is the fourth. But that's the basic principle on which the whole universe is constructed.
Oh my God.
It's a relativity system in which motion
Who's right?
depends on comparison with something relatively still. And there can't be any motion at all unless there is that comparison. So, because of this relationship, every individual is so related to everything else that's going on that you imply it. In other words, anybody who was a great scientist from some other world altogether, who studied a human body carefully, and figured out the conditions under which such a thing would exist, he would come to the conclusion that that human body was something from a universe just such as we have. He would find that your structure and your behavior implied this whole thing. Just as with a laser beam system, you can photograph a small fragment of any photographic negative, and from that tiny fragment you can reconstruct the whole picture from which it was taken, because the crystalline tensions in that fragment imply the whole context of crystalline tensions that belong to that particular negative. So in exactly the same way, you as an individual imply this world, and this world mutually implies you. And you are a natural formation, moving in and with this universe, not determined by it, because this is not a system of determinism. But you are moving with it in just the same harmonious way that you notice the waves moving, and the trees growing, and the clouds moving. Yeah. And as you don't accuse the clouds of making aesthetic mistakes, right, so really is a certain light in which you can see human beings, both good and bad, as perfect forms of nature. You may have fashionable discriminations about who is beautiful and who is ugly. You may have metaphysical discriminations about who is sick and who is healthy. You may have moral discriminations about who is good and who is evil. But these are all points of view, relative points of view. They're all legitimate because they are parts of the functioning of the whole. The fact that you take those points of view, that too is part of nature.
It happened.
But a skillful person lives on two levels at once. You live basically on the level where you know there are no mistakes. Can't be.
Can't happen.
Everything moves in accordance with what the Chinese call the Tao, the way of nature.
Okay.
And if you have that basic feeling, you will always be sane.
Yeah.
But you are able to comprehend within that feeling a more restricted point of view, whereby things are good and bad. Just as in the confines of this room and this area, it's perfectly clear that there's a difference between the up direction and the down direction. But we know that this area is situated in interstellar space, and there is no up and no down. Now the second situation doesn't contradict the first. But if you have only the discriminatory point of view, if you take your fundamental stand as a being on the difference between good and evil, you get in the Christian hang-up. You have then to say that there is eternal heaven and eternal hell, that the distinction between good and evil is radical. And if you do that, you begin to suffer from a disease called chronic guilt, which is one of the most destructive emotions that anybody can have. You feel an outcast from the universe, at odds with reality itself, at odds with God. And that sends people quite mad, and is responsible for a good deal of the craziness of Western civilization. It's making too much of a good thing out of the distinction between good and evil. It is an important distinction, but it's not fundamentally important. And you have to learn to admit different degrees of importance. And just say that because you can't just say that because a certain distinction isn't absolute, that it's not important. After all, your own physical formation is not absolute, but it's important. So, the situation of man in this network is to repeat the proposition, on the one hand, that he as an organism psychophysical organism is something that the whole cosmos is doing. That was as much of truth, I think, as there is in modern astrology, which I regard as a pseudoscience. But it is based on a very fundamental principle. When you draw a map of a person's soul, you draw a small picture of the universe, a very crude picture. And that is the design of that person's individuality. The truth is, therefore, that your soul is something which contains your body. Your body does not have the soul inside it like a spook. And the whole cosmos is your soul. So the cosmos is doing you at the point you call here and now. Reciprocally, you are doing it. And the one depends upon the other. You have difficulty in conceiving this as a Westerner because we have all been brainwashed by several centuries of put-down theories of man. That you were the wretched little subject, and a disobedient one at that, of an eternal king, and B, that you were just a fortuitous congress of atoms in a mindless mechanism of incredible vastness. Having entertained those two theories of man and of existence for so many centuries, we are very much brainwashed into being unable to see that we and the universe are mutually causative, or to use the Chinese expression, mutually arising. Now then, a second difficulty arises in this, which requires that I bring in some ideas, first of all, from Buckminster Fuller.
First of all, I have to...
The principal notion of Buckminster Fuller's thought, and if you don't know this name,
I think that's about it. We got a lot of stuff going on, and I'm really just trying to review everything live because,
man who is one of the most creative minds in the modern world.
Check it out.
He invented the geodesic dome.
You want to play another game? We'll play another Call of Duty. We'll do another Call of Duty, see what happens.
But beyond
really
that, he's done a great deal of extremely fascinating thinking about the future of technology and the situation of man in the universe. And he has devised this important term, synergy. Coming from the Greek syn, with, ergos, work.
Soon with work? Soon with work.
But what he means by synergy is this. That every complex organism has as a whole an intelligence greater than any one of its parts.
You're of this with your body.
And that every complex organism as a whole has an intelligence greater than any one of its parts. But this again is a difficult idea to swallow because he applies it to technology in this way. He is saying that the industrial natural complex in which we live
This is in relation to
is something that is going in a certain direction on its own, whether you like it or not.
the Tao.
And that
really
it
made an
is
ass of
able
myself.
to organize your behavior in a more intelligent way than you can organize it. And he believes, therefore, that the increasing complexity of the industrial complex will of itself, say, outlaw such lunacy as war. It will make it impossible. And that we shall find ourselves increasingly organized by an intelligent system that is not under our conscious direction, but will make us feel, I suppose, rather as our individual selves feel inside our bodies. He gives an illustration. The transportation communications network, aircraft, radio, television, telephone, these taken together are constituting a global net, which might be said to be something like Teilhard de Chardin's idea of the noosphere. I hope you all read Teilhard de Chardin, the famous Jesuit theologian who wrote the best of his books is The Phenomenon of Man. The Earth, which is the geosphere, from the Greek geos, geese, the Earth. Then the Earth, as the geosphere, is covered with a biosphere. That is the sphere of living organisms.
I'm Christian.
The biosphere, in turn, generates the noosphere, which is the communication network that we call the mind, through literature, through speech, through radio and television communication. The noosphere is slowly realized. So, Buckminster Fuller is really talking about the same thing. The noosphere is the network of communication set up by technology. And so, for example, let's just take air transportation. As a result of jet planes, all centers that are in communication with each other by jet aircraft are becoming increasingly the same place. When you wake up in Tokyo, having come from Los Angeles or San Francisco, you are slightly in doubt as to where you are. Because Tokyo is an immense muddle. It's a mixture of Paris with Los Angeles, of San Francisco with Shanghai, of London, vaguely thrown in, and sort of a touch of Japan. It's a phenomenal place. But if you live in San Francisco, you realize it's becoming more like Tokyo. Because we have a tremendous inrush of Japanese culture. We have superb Japanese restaurants. You can go to sushi bars, that is to say bars for rice balls and raw fish, which are beautifully served, just like in a bar in Tokyo. And increasingly, we have supermarkets which sell Oriental, African, and Japanese goods. And I call them supermarkets for the unusual. And more people are laying down tatami mats and cooking over hibachis and using chopsticks and every kind of thing like that. So the point is that how near a place is to you is simply a factor of transportation. There are places in the United States. I was just in one in a far out Indian area of South Dakota. It takes longer to reach than to get to Tokyo. So it's further away. That's all there is to it, for all practical purposes. So Fuller's idea is that by the year 1968, so soon, we have a one-town world. And it's coming fast. And as human beings have some problem adapting to this, because as you know, when you travel by jet, just as when you're in an elevator that drops too fast, you feel it left your stomach on the 14th floor and it's taken the rest of you down to the first. So the jet aircraft leaves your psyche in London and brings your body to San Francisco. And it takes some time to catch up. All your time rhythms are thrown off. But we'll get used to it. And eventually, therefore, we must add to this, planes are very expensive. All governments have immense investments in aircraft. And to work, they must be kept flying. Otherwise, they get out of order. So they must be kept moving. That means there's also a huge tourist business, constantly interested in shuffling people all around the earth. And as a result of that, it's going to be increasingly a vested interest. And politicians will find it harder and harder to stop it in the interest of having a war. So what we are in effect reduced to at the moment, so far as wars are concerned, are experimental wars. Wars in small areas against people who allegedly don't matter very much, in order to test out our military materials and techniques. Because nobody can afford to keep a large standing army in which there are no veterans. So they must have practice, and so practice wars are carefully arranged. But increasingly, you see, they find that these practice wars rouse passions and disturb everybody in all directions, because there is no such thing as an unimportant people. And so they become increasingly difficult to carry on. So Fuller is extraordinarily hopeful about the future of mankind, because he feels that the synergy, the quality of intelligence in the total system, will overcome the folly of individuals or of parts who are unable to act with full understanding of what's going on. And you see, this is a serious problem, so far as the individual is concerned. Because today, not only is there a population bomb, there's also an information bomb. The proliferation of information about everything is so great that no individual can possibly grasp it. Not only has he difficulty in grasping it, but there is difficulty even for big committees to organize this information, to integrate it in such a way that if I need to know a certain thing, I can very swiftly find it out. For an individual untrained in physics, it's very difficult to find out quickly about physics, because physics is expressed in a mathematical language which he probably has never learned to read. So the time lag in scanning, you see, all consciousness is a matter of scanning. And it takes in the totality of events in the world by a sweeping motion, like the glance of our eyes round a room. Well, it takes time to glance your eyes round the room and register what's there, if you want to remember it consciously. So what we are saying is that the intelligence of the system, the synergy, is more intelligent than any individual consciousness can be. But, of course, as a living organism, you are much more than consciousness, in this scanning sense, because you certainly don't arrange the complexities of your own brain by conscious decision. That's something that you grow. Or we could put it this way, that the intelligence of the universe grows as it grows you. But here again is another hurdle for the average Westerner, whose common sense is derived from the philosophy of science current in the 19th century, of thinking that the organization of the universe is intelligent. That seems to us to echo of theism, of God ideas where God is based on an anthropomorphic or man-like image, the old gentleman with whiskers in the sky. And of course that God is dead, beyond recall.
Beyond recall.
But that's not the only kind of God. To think of the universe itself, its vast and complex organization, as being intelligent, what on earth does that mean? What do you mean by the word intelligent? Well, when you come to think of it, it's the most difficult word to define. Everybody knows what it is, but very few can say. It's like you know what love is, but just try and define it. You know what time is, but try and define that. Space, everybody knows what space is, but it's the most difficult thing to pin down. And that's equally true of intelligence. We can see certain elements in intelligence. We can see complexity as an element of it. Mm-hmm. We can see complexity as what we call an orderly arrangement of different clusters of complexity.
Galaxies.
But again, we're using words, all of which are imprecise. What do you mean orderly? That's practically to say it's all in order. It was almost like saying it's intelligently arranged. We recognize these things, but we are not quite sure what we mean by them. But we recognize them at once. And for example, if we begin with the pure hypothesis that we ourselves are intelligent, let it go at that. If we're not, then nothing is. But let's, for the sake of argument, say that we human beings are intelligent. Now, if that is so, then the environment in which we live must also be intelligent. Because we are symptoms of that environment. And I don't for the life of me see how you can have intelligent symptoms of an unintelligent organization.
Can't see it. Not for the life of me.
We belong in this world.
Oh.
We didn't arrive here from somewhere else. We're not tourists in the universe. We're expressions of it. Like branches express the tree, or fruit express the tree. And so you will not find an intelligent organism living in an unintelligent environment. That is to say, the environment in which you live will be a system of mutual cooperation between a vast complexity of different kinds of organisms. And the total balance of that makes your life possible. In other words, human life goes with, as front goes with back, an extremely complex bacteriological world, which sometimes diseases us, but most of the time assists us by its colonies, its societies, its methods of reproduction. All these complex interrelations are the which,
on what charge?
Without which not the sine qua non
on what charge?
of there being blood and veins and bones and intestines and all that kind of thing. That's only the bacteriological world. In addition to that, there's a world of insects, which is tremendously important to us.
Yeah.
But the insects are extremely clever. And if you talk to a good entomologist, he will scare the wits out of you, because he will show you the most conclusive reasons why insects should ultimately take the whole planet over. Fortunately, we are not absolutely abominated by flies, because we have lots of spiders. And we have birds.
Good thing.
And so birds and insects are mutually necessary to each other.
Why didn't the officers tell them what the fuck the problem was?
And especially flowers and insects have an arrangement with each other whereby one could
This kind
say
of shit that makes
of
me
flowers and bees that although
Yes, it
they look
does.
very different,
Provokes that.
they are one and the same organism.
It's you.
Flowers, perfume and color. Bees buzz
Everything is
and
you.
fly around.
Listen, really?
But you can't have the flowers without the bees, and you can't have the bees without the flowers.
We'd die without either.
And so you can think through relationships between every conceivable kind of organism, into which you must add things like atmosphere qualities, gas content of atmosphere, on and on and on, until you suddenly realize that what you call your mind and intelligence and your very brain and body is utterly involved with this network of other kinds of organisms, existing at a special temperature, in certain gases, which could only be found in certain kinds of solar systems. Now then, seeing that should give every technologist pause. Because you can't go running into that situation with penicillin and DDT unless you know very well when to stop. Less you can be very discriminating, just what surplus of insects you want to get rid of, without killing the other ones that are important. How to give penicillin without destroying all the stomach flora, and having to build them up again with acidophilus and stuff. So this is why in the Taoist Chinese view of nature and the relation of nature to human politics, they set as fundamental the principle called Wu Wei.
Remember that?
Wu Wei.
No, not negation. Force. No force.
Wu Wei. Which means non-interference. Not quite what we mean by laissez-faire, but rather
Laissez-faire.
That is to say, when you act upon nature, and you must, you can't help but interfere. There's no way of isolating yourself from the world. Every time you breathe, you interfere with something. See? But the art of Wu Wei is that when you interfere, endeavor to do so by going with the grain of things. In other words, if you want to split wood, split it with the grain. Don't try to split it across the grain. And likewise, when you want to pick a fight, don't use violence, but use the other person's violence to bring about his downfall. That's judo. And that judo is applied Wu Wei. Sailing is Wu Wei.
Sailing.
What?
As distinct from rowing, which isn't. So then, the Taoists, you see, recognized that there is this universal organism. And they thought of the cosmos as a great organism without a boss. There is no one in Chinese philosophy making the world happen or ordering it. There is no, as it were, central principle in the middle which sends out commands to all the subordinate parts. But rather, that the thing organizes itself. Their word for nature being zhan, meaning what is so of itself.
You are.
So they saw the whole
body.
cosmos as a self-regulating organism. And they further saw that the individual is not merely a part of that organism.
Part.
He is an expression of the whole thing. And the whole depends upon this expression, just as much as the expression depends upon it. And that was the principle of mutual interpenetration, which is called in, it's more familiarly known by its Japanese name, Jiji Muge. Principle of the network. Between thing-event and thing-event, there is no obstruction.
Self and other.
But you see, it remains to us a bit of a puzzle to say that all this is an intelligence, because we can think of all kinds of objections to it. We can think, if by some conscious science we were able to construct the universe, we would do it a little differently. We would have improvements to suggest upon mosquitoes. We would, perhaps a great surgeon might suggest that the human body be organized a little differently. We can think of dozens of things. But you find the curious thing is this. When you try to think out carefully how to improve the world, then you realize is what the consequences of your suggestion would be. You wouldn't like all of the consequences. Hence the saying, be careful of what you desire. You may get it.
That's true, man. I live in constant
then
regret
one invites
of everything
the individual.
of getting everything that I
this is one of the
desired.
great things to do.
I'm like,
to
oops.
suggest another kind
Oh
of
my
universe.
god, I can't believe
Another
I...
kind of view.
Holy
What
shit.
kind of universe would you design if you were God? And I recommend, I'm not going to go into this because it's a long story, but I thoroughly recommend it as an exercise in thought. Model your own universe and see what comes out. Because I can only tell you that you will eventually discover that you will model this one.
This one. Right here, right now. You model this one.
And you'll find out, you see, that it's based on certain absolutely fundamental principles, which of course includes the game of hide and seek. Now you see it, now you don't, which is vibration, which is the same thing as energy. You've got to begin with that. But once you start with that, it implies the rest. Because all that we see around us is just a fantastic combination of black and white elements of what the Chinese call the yin and the yang, the negative and positive forces. And it all leads to this, but in an incredible dance.
And it all leads to this.
So then,
Our brain.
you have difficulty, though, of course, in seeing the world as an organism. Because when you look out at the stars, you are in roughly the same situation or relationship to what you are seeing as when a physicist studies the constitution of the atom. He will make a map of the behavior of the nucleus, in which there will be various rotating particles or wavicles. And you will see something which looks like a mathematical design and doesn't look like an organism. Because we expect
Alright, we'll play another one.
to be a kind of gooey thing with blood, flesh, wrinkles, and so on. So if you looked only through the microscope, you wouldn't see the organism. But when we look out at the rest of the universe, we are, as it were, sitting down on one of those electrons, looking through a microscope at the rest of it. And therefore we don't see the sort of total design it makes up.
The harmony on one level.
That's much too far away from our conscious inspection.
But it looks like
And
conflict
this is one of
to
the
us
reasons
down here.
why it's difficult for us to formulate the idea that there is an intelligence operating here. Because all we see is a firework display, this tremendous display of radioactive mud and gas. And one would say, well, that's it's just a kind of a contraption that happened to arrive there. And,
We are still live.
That's all there is
Nobody's
to it.
watching. Somebody's watching on Twitch. I think it's Rob.
But
I
the
bet
funny
it's
thing
Rob.
about man is that he can put himself down
bet
and
it's Rob.
say that he is
Hey,
an
Rob.
accident,
It might be
a
Rob.
kind of colloidal chemical accident that occurred on this very unimportant rock,
Yeah, you don't matter.
rotating around a lesser star on the fringe of one of the minor galaxies.
Mine
Put
guy.
down.
And that
Put
this
down
is
theories.
where we are, and that the universe
That's it.
does not give a damn about it. Yet the odd thing is that this wretched little chemical thing can reflect an image of the whole cosmos in its vastness inside its head, and can know he's there.
You know.
And that means, though, that this thing, however small in dimensions, is vast in comprehension. And what scale are you going to attach the word importance to?
Oh.
Mere size or degree of comprehension? By degree of comprehension, man is huge. By that scale. So then, if the principle is simply that if we can see from a perfectly physical point of view, what we would call a strictly scientific point of view, that the individual organism goes with its environment in just the same way as bees go with flowers. And flowers in their turn go with grubs. And grubs in their turn go with birds. And so on, all the way through. Then, when you want to define yourself, you cannot say that I am just what is inside the skin. Because what is inside the skin goes with everything outside and constitutes a single, complex field of diversified behaviors.
You need me to be here.
Diversified processes. You look at that then from a strictly physical point of view.
It's just physics.
And there it is.
You're everything.
But then the trouble comes up is, you say when you've studied that, and you've read all the books on ecology and botany and zoology, astronomy, and so on, you say, yes, I see that. That's quite true, theoretically. But I would like to be able to feel that this is so, as mystics report that they have felt.
None of that's mystical yet. That's just common sense.
To have that kind of experience in which the network is absolutely clear. Because you see, if we don't take it that far, if we know about it theoretically only, the theoretical knowledge is not going to have much effect on what we do. But knowledge of a more emotionally compelling nature will indeed affect the way we act with respect to our environment. And may, in fact, prevent us from destroying our environment, as we are now very busily doing. It's interesting that the Congress of the United States recently passed an act making it a very serious offense to burn the American flag. And they passed this act with many patriotic speeches and rhetoric and much reciting of poems. This is the most fantastic example of American confusion between symbol and reality, between menu and meal. Because this same Congress is directly or indirectly responsible for burning up what the flag stands for, namely the geographical United States and its people. By not really doing much about the devastation of our forests, the pollution of our water and atmosphere, the reckless waste of our natural resources, and resorting to a form of economy which, under any sane circumstances, would be termed sheer lunacy. And they say they cannot distinguish between the symbol and the reality because we are all hypnotized with words and symbols. And so when the flag is more precious than the country, we are insane. When you say, I love my country, and what you mean by that is you feel certain emotions when you salute a flag. You don't love your country at all.
We'll get that one here in a second.
Love your country at all.
Because to love the country, it means to participate in its life in a loving way, in a considerate way. And after all, our animals are, in a certain sense, members of the United States. Birds, bears, all these lovely creatures. And what we are doing is we are getting rid of birds at a fast rate. We've reduced certain populations of birds by as much as 75% in the last few years. Because they eat our poisonous insecticides and so on. And eventually they get into us. That's love of country. as a result of this confusion, you see, and failure to see that the outside world is not a kind of chunk of mineral resources and cows to be exploited and be just eaten up. If we do that, we turn ourselves into a swarm of locusts on the planet.
Too many species.
The price for eating beef is that you must farm beef. You must conduct husbandry. You must
Animal
help cattle to
husbandry.
multiply, and you must care for them properly. The same with fishing. We have not husbanded whales, and therefore they're on their way to extinction. This is the price, that you've got to cherish the animals that you live off. And then furthermore, after that, to put in my particular prejudice, you've got to cook them properly.
First opinions.
You don't just chew it up because it's supposed to give you energy. It'll be good for you. That's an irreverent use of dead animals, dead plants. They give their lives for you. And the proper response to that is take it with reverence. And that means cook it well. So that your act of cooking is like the rituals of a priest at an altar. It is the sacrificial altar, the chopping board and the range, which we use. And it's not a kind of a... Kitchens are not to be looked on as sort of lavatories where you throw things together to put in at the upper end. So...
I'll show you a trick.
But this can only come about you see, in a situation.
That's why I could have showed you. Show everybody.
Where human beings are vividly aware of
How do you think that lighter got like that?
the external world
I got a pretty
as
big
much
lighter,
themselves as their own bodies. And you must allow yourself, therefore, to feel that what you see is
a
not
good trick.
merely something
Nobody's watching.
out there.
Okay.
It's actually really weird. I
It's
feel
in
like
your head.
Facebook Live
It's
is...
in your head.
And your head's in it.
All of this. And your
And
head's
these
in it.
things mutually
I feel like
interpenetrate each
Facebook
other
Live
like
is
this.
shut everybody down.
Now it's in your head. Now your head's in it. Now it's in your
Me,
head.
I'm
Now
a
your
street
head's in it.
Oh,
That's
because
it.
that's in your head, and you're it.
And this rhythm
Your
sets up
head's in
what we
it.
call vision.
And that's what we call vision, that oscillation. It's in my head. I'm in it.
So
It's
if
in my
you
head.
see
I'm in
that
it.
the external world is as much you
Hey,
as
Connor.
anything inside your skin or anything inside your head,
Colin,
Connor.
then you have a certain respect for it.
certain respect.
And no longer consider matter, for example. Take a piece of wood. A piece of wood's not just a chunk of stuff.
So,
But people think about wood that way. You can't be a good carpenter if that's the way you think about wood.
You think that way about wood?
We think we're dealing, you see, with these inert, unfeeling blocks of stuff. Rocks have no feelings, of course. Bang it around.
No, these
Mountains
Bang it
have no
around.
feelings. Blow them up with dynamite.
blow them up. They don't feel
But
it.
they do have feelings. And if you hurt them, as the Indians say, I've just been with a whole bunch of Indians, they say the continent of the United States is getting ready to shake us off as a dog would shake off fleas. They say the storms are going to get worse, the earthquakes worse, the floods worse.
Mutual arousal.
The insect pests will multiply in all sorts of strange ways and finally get rid of us and leave the land
Viruses.
to the Indians who originally owned it. The question arose this morning.
It's time.
That was good timing there, Joel. You did.
Well, I
I
guess
hope
so.
you enjoyed it.